Hello and welcome to our live Liberty Alert. I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz here at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty offices in Washington, D.C. And today we are going to talk about the Judge Barrett nomination, and the overriding question is, what does faith have to do with it? And so we are going to talk again about one of the principles that we espouse as two kingdom. You know, remember when we talk about two kingdom, God engages the world. So God is in control in all things. Any place, America, not America, whatever. God is in control, but He preserves the world His unique way, and He saves the world His unique way. And we differentiate those works of God, or at least God differentiates them, and we honor God's work that way. So today we're going to talk about one of our principles called vocational respect, seeking the truth. And so there's a vocation called Supreme Court Justice. And I think we need to be those who respect that office and again, respect what it's supposed to do in our lives. And that's what we want to talk about today. And I do think Christians have a better sense of that than even those who are secular progressives. But the secular progressives are challenging the notion. They're saying that Christians generally cannot be good public servants. And folks, that's an underlying challenge that's all throughout our society today. And we have to take that head on, and we have to quit being defensive about that. We have to go on the offensive and say, I actually think we make better public servants for everybody. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. If she's being challenged, if ACB is being challenged for being Catholic, what should she say? We're going to talk about what people thought she should say, and then what she has said, and then we'll talk about, she says some incredibly good things. She's pretty darn tough, I'll tell you that. And so again, it's been kind of a delight to see. But again, some of it I still think is defensive in the sense that it actually assumes that the question has validity. And I think we have to start really going after the sense, where did that question come from, Senator? Why would you even ask me that kind of question? Especially when our freedoms are founded on the notion that we are created by God. Are you saying that you don't believe that? And if you don't believe that, how can you constitutionally lead such a diverse people? But again, those are the kind of things we want to talk about. And then the Supreme Court, hopefully this might put some of these things to rest, but I doubt it. So again, thank you all for tuning in, and keep sharing our live Liberty Alerts. Give out our website, lcrlfreedom.org. Can't tell you, I mean, we're getting more and more people using it, but it's still not enough. We're producing a lot of good stuff, and I'm not the only one writing things. So I love my mom and pop papers. I wrote those, and I especially think those are going to be helpful to you if you're concerned about these issues. But again, thank you for sharing, giving our website out, but we need more and more people to utilize these things. And we've got a lot more writers, we've got a lot more information being put up there. And so put these things to use for your sake. Everything's downloadable, everything is accessible. There's video versions, there's audio versions, and there's paper versions of a lot of these things. All right, so thanks for listening, and we can't do this without you. And again, if you would actually in your prayers be prayerfully thinking about supporting us, we would love that too. There's a button on our website that allows you to support us too. We only are in D.C. because of good people like you who are supporting us. We're in nobody's budget. So again, just keep us in your thoughts and prayers. All right. No matter what your politics, thanks for listening, because God knows this. If you're a Christian, this is how we think about things. The government cannot save us. Even if it's good government, it's not designed to do that. It's God's emergency organization because of humanity's sin. It's to keep things from getting worse than they can be. So it has a limited role in our lives. And we've taught this over and over again. Good government can't save us, but bad government can destroy us. And so we try to institute the best government we can, but we know even if that's being done well, laws won't prevent, it won't change our hearts. That's got to come from someplace else. In a free society, serving neighbors is the best place to actually go. So again, we need more citizenship of free people, not more government programs. We need people working together in their communities. That's one of the reasons why we espouse even freedom in education, especially religious liberty, so that churches and free organizations can deal with the issues of the day. So our week in review, we've got to revisit some of the COVID-19 stuff because the persecution stuff still goes on. It's amazing. I saw a picture where, and we had some friends over to the house, and they flew to our house, and their plane was full. Their plane was full, and yet in some parts of the country, churches are being locked down again. They're being fined. They're being persecuted. I read an article about in New York City. It says over $150,000 in fines issued on the first weekend of the new New York City lockdown. And churches are especially being targeted for this. Pastors and rabbis are going to jail over this stuff. California, that's happening in California too. So, but again, just stepping back from this, we had friends over, like I said, this weekend, and we went to a concert in downtown St. Louis. So this concert was outdoors in a parking lot. This was the most bizarre thing I have ever seen. They had us in pods. So they put down grass, artificial grass, and they roped us off 4 people per pod. Then you had to walk a certain direction. If you had to go to the bathroom, you had to step out of your pod and walk a certain direction. And you couldn't, you couldn't go backwards. You couldn't go in between pods. You had to walk all the way around because it might be COVID-19, and we're living in this terror. And then if you got in your pods, you were never supposed to associate with any other people in any other pods. Now we had 6 people, so 3 and 3, and we bought and again all the food stuff was closed down, so we had to order some food, so we had it delivered. We had to share some of that food. Well, I guess some guy came over and harassed my wife and said, if you do that again, if you guys share these food or you share your bucket of light beer that you got, we're going to not only ask you to leave, we're going to kick you out. And we're not going to refund your money. And it was kind of this living in Gestapo land. And I thought, this is outrageous. We're outside. We're about 15 feet from everybody. And there wasn't even that many people there. Why would they come for something like this? Felt bad for the people who were actually trying to make a living by putting their concert on. The very next night, we went to the St. Louis County. We went to an outdoor restaurant that had music. And it was packed. And people abided by the rules, and when they were at their table, they could take their masks off. When they got up, they put them back on. But people enjoyed each other's company. There was and again, the mayor of St. Louis is locking us down like we're in a concentration camp, and the county is living life more normally, trying to honor social distancing issues. It's kind of bizarre to see what this has come to. There's conflicting information on all kinds of stuff. I think even the World Health Organization or the CDC, I can't remember which one, came out with a statement that the lockdowns probably didn't have to be done. First there was masks don't help, now masks do help. Again, all things, give us the information, let us make our decisions for our life, give us the ability to honor those who are afraid of this thing, but get on with the business of actually getting our lives going, because I just saw another number that said in 2018, all deaths in America were 2.839. In 2019, 2.855. And up through the end of September, we are down from that number, way down to 2.033. What that means is that even a lot of these COVID-19 deaths were probably deaths of other causes as well. Locking the whole country down as if all of us are in threat of dying from this disease is crazy. And so it's gotten very, very, very political. John Macarthur, if you're watching what's happening in the news with John Macarthur, an evangelical pastor in California, just want you to understand this. There's something nefarious going on with these edicts, especially as to how it deals with the churches. And he's been standing up to this, talking about how the church is an essential voice, especially in a time of pandemic like this. I believe he's right on that. Again, they're coming after his church. We'll have to kind of watch that with, again, fines, threats of being put in jail, all these different kind of things. All for exercising their constitutional right within the legitimate guidelines, of taking this pandemic seriously, but not being so scared about it that we lose our ability to live life in this world today. So the biggest issue for me, if you're dealing with this, I don't know what states you're in. Some of the states are coming after churches again, some are not. Just like we saw the difference between St. Louis City and St. Louis County. It's hard to make an edict for the whole country, but here's what you got to deal with. The church, you need to deal with the idea that the church is not essential. You can't let the government get away with establishing that reality. I mean, if Walmart is open to everybody, the church should be open to everybody. And it's silly to start saying, well, one is more contagious than another. One is actually more essential than the other, and Walmart is not the essential one. It's the church. That's the First Amendment reality of our culture. And that's, if you don't believe in the First Amendment, well, that's your prerogative, but you don't have the right. That's the constitutional ordering of our country, and we have that freedom to do that. And so the church should be treated like everybody else. They at least must be given the same basic freedoms that others are being given. Actually, I say they should be given more because they're a First Amendment protected organization. And so we have an essential function in society. So we've been talking about this. Guys, there's pastoral applications to this. So please talk to your church councils. Please talk to your pastors, your circuit counselors, your district presidents. Make sure that you let people know what you're thinking. Try to be faithful citizens. But at a certain point, we can't let this government say, when the real issues hit in our country, the church is not essential. We just can't let them say that. I think they're more essential than ever. So, again, we should be people of hope. We should be people who are not afraid of these issues. And we should be the kind of people who can then start to distinguish good policy and bad because of that. And I pray for your ability to work through this. It's just crazy. You know, when you see what happens when a government official thinks, I can lock them down and they'll stay put, and then they realize that there's other political reasons why they might want to do that. What's interesting is what happens to certain people who then take that edict and then enforce it for the sake of the government. Just like the people at this concert we went to. This guy thought he was like a guard, you know, at a prison camp. The way he was coming and scolding people and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, where did that guy suddenly, you know, get that kind of confidence to come around and start threatening people? Well, it's because he had the edict from the mayor to do so. We don't need a community like that. We sure don't need government like that. So again, I pray for you at this point. Church is essential. You have First Amendment protections. But if you're being threatened by the government, you gotta talk to your officials and start to think, what is the plan of action? Because we need to be the church for the sake of the community. Today, though, we want to talk about Judge Barrett because I think it gets to the heart of some of what we're talking about, even with this pandemic. And before we do, we have mom and pop papers on our website. I'm also doing kind of a video presentation or a reading of it every Sunday it comes out. And then we're also doing a podcast of it, so you can listen to it if you want, if you don't want to read it. But the first one is this notion, if God is at work in the world, which He is, two different ways, which He is, then we can have vocational respect for people, even if they're not Christian. So we can have respect for people who do what they're told. So if we have a policeman who doesn't happen to be a Christian, but he abides by the limitations and the things he's supposed to do as a policeman, and he honors the law, same thing with a mayor or with a school teacher, or if they honor the vocational limitations of their vocation and effectively do it with excellence, we can honor it even if they're not Christian. I would say if they're not moral, that'd be a different discussion. But, you know, if you have a moral, ethical person and it's morals and ethics that kind of jive with the Ten Commandments, which is in the heart of every human being, I mean, we can get along with or even work together with and surely respect people in those vocations. So vocational respect that always seeks justice. So when we see things like defund the police or abolish ICE or censure the police or tear down the government, we start to see those kind of notions. We go, no. And it's the same thing with when people say, take the authority away from moms and dads and give the children over to the schools or give them over to the magistrates. No. Again, we honor vocations. We have vocational respect. And there is a priority to that vocational respect. So much like the fourth commandment, it tells us to honor our father and mothers, then the Bible prioritizes from there on down that we should respect God's preserving vocations in the world for the sake of what they're called to do. And even if you disagree with what they're doing, you should go through legitimate legal ways of redress rather than just tear it all down and supposedly build another one up, because that disrespect is what then finally becomes the modus operandi in society. So be subject to the authorities. That's the Bible's perspective, because God is preserving the world through those authorities. He's not saving it. So when you talk about being subject to Caesar, oh my gosh, Caesar did some terrible things. But there's a way we had to learn how to honor that, even as we called him to account in those days. Well, it's the same idea today. We have to learn how to honor, even as we hold them accountable. And so, like, I've got a voter's guide that I'm working on. I'm not sure if it's my personal thoughts on this. So I'm not sure if I'm going to post it because it's not an official statement of the LCRL. But I'm telling you, vote principles. Vote your principles. Understand what your principles are. Understand what the government can do, what it can't do. Understand what moms and dads are supposed to do. Understand what the church is supposed to do. And then vote to kind of keep those things in order. Ben Sass, Senator Sass, had a great opening statement for the Judge Barrett confirmation hearings. He differentiated between civics, which are the laws and engagement rules, and then politics, what people are trying to get across. And he says we need to differentiate those things. I said, I think he's right. That was great. We also then need to differentiate civics and politics from free citizens and what they can do, especially when they're motivated by their faith. So even this be subject first attitude doesn't mean we just do what we're told. It means that we hold them accountable in an honoring sort of way. And their role ultimately is to protect, not to take care of us. And that's probably one of my biggest beefs today, is the government is being asked to do things it's not supposed to do. Also, public vocations for service. I have another one. It's called A Message Whose Time Has Come. And it was talking about a different way to be a public person. In Caesar's realm, you just were a subject or you were part of Caesar's government. There was kind of no in-between. Well, there was an in-between, but it sure wasn't something like a middle class or, free to be a public person and organize people. There just wasn't that kind of in-between realm. Well, we actually have that in our country in a way that almost no other country does. So that middle class, that public organizing, that being able to organize things like boys clubs and girls clubs, and it used to be the Scouts, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, and they were apolitical organizations. They were built on Judeo-Christian understanding of male, female, and their uniqueness, and how to try to make them the best that they could be. Well, all that's been politicized and made political today. We need to take some of that middle ground public stuff back. So not everything is political. That's the other thing. Luther brought back this notion of vocation. So in Luther's day, you were either part of the state and the Holy Roman Emperor stuff, and that was important, or you're part of the church, and everybody else in between almost didn't really matter. Luther's view of vocation, the Bible's view of vocation, is no, those people kind of who aren't in Caesar's realm, or who aren't public officials of the church, they really matter because God's at work in their vocations too. So again, not everything is political. And that's another view we bring to the table when we engage these public things. And then the final one I wanted to kind of point out to you was, it's called Honor Your Local Sheriff, Support Your Local Families. There's a priority to our public life and what is first and foremost. And I got to tell you, federal government was not supposed to be first and foremost in your life. The Founding Fathers actually believe the federal government should be very limited, very specific, and most of the work in your life and the public engagement in your life was supposed to happen in your communities, with your aldermen, with your mayors, and in your school boards. That's where all this was supposed to happen. And the federal government has now got its tentacles in everything, and that is a bad thing for freedom-loving people. And it's definitely a bad thing for the church that wants to have a specific voice that can even temper the government, because federal governments like to be, well, they don't stop. They just keep growing into everything, and eventually, and like we've even seen in Virginia, they'll even start to tell the church what it's supposed to preach and teach. So this one argues that a healthy society can be traced back to healthy families, healthy children, strong moms and dads, and in places where those relationships are strong, police and government can actually be limited because people are disciplined and motivated to do what is right, not just for themselves, but for their communities and their churches. And so again, honoring our local authorities, but understanding how they fit into God's scheme of things for the sake of preserving the world. That's something we need to talk about. And that's what the whole thing with Judge Barrett's about. She is, in some ways, a lawyer whose only job is to make sure the constitutional limitations of government are honored. And it's amazing to me that people don't see why that's so important. If the Supreme Court does not keep a lot of these people in check, they will literally begin to run every aspect of our lives. And I think, I mean, there's all kinds of evidence of it out there. I still go back to the very day when the mayor of New York decided what soft drinks you could drink. I just thought, what does he even? What concern of that is that for him? Well, because he's now involved in your health care, he can tell you how much sugary drinks you can drink, or he can tell you what kind of food you can drink. He can tell you whether you can have a cigar in your backyard or not. And he can make sure that if you don't do what you're told, he can punish you either through taxes, he can punish you through citations, and you start to begin to realize that is exactly the things we didn't want to see happen in our country. So again, when you start to see that they're willing to even get into that level of our lives, wow, where will that stop? We sure can't let them dictate what we as a church preach and teach. So her job, if I really was thinking about what would I want in a Supreme Court justice, her job is to make sure that these legislators can't legislate things that they're not allowed to constitutionally. And all these agencies, we have all kinds of agencies that create all kinds of rules and regulations, and then they enforce them even without congressional support. The Supreme Court can say you can't do that. You can't do that. It's not in the Constitution. There's a way of amending the Constitution if you want to change it. You can't just have a judge say, well, we decided we think it should be different. So let's talk a little bit about what she's doing, how she's, the process that's going on in her work right now. Because Trump nominated her, a couple weeks back, and she said this. She said, "I love the United States. I love the United States Constitution. I'm humbled by the prospect of serving on the Supreme Court." When she says something like that, you need to understand what she's saying. There's principles that undergird this country that really have created the most freedom for the most people in any culture in the world today, and the most diverse culture in the world today that lives free. So again, the constitutional limitations on government are part of that, and I think she understands that, and her role then is to make sure that she adheres to that. What's interesting is she's immediately been attacked. She was attacked right away because she's a conservative Christian. Now listen, I've talked a lot on these programs about this. If you believe the Bible is true, you believe what the Bible says about our moral understanding of the Bible, about creation, and about all these different things, about the fall into sin, and you believe about Jesus and Christmas and Easter, all those different things, I need to explain to you over and over and over again that the secular, progressive, political movement that's in our country today hates that view of life. And not only do they think of that view of life as, well, that's silly, they are going to legislate it out of existence in our culture. Because they think it's a threat to progress. I've tried to give you some names of people that have said this boldly, but I mean, everything you watch, when you watch, there's some kind of, I haven't even watched it because I'm not going to give it any credence. You know, The Handmaid's Tale, the dystopic future about, you know, what, and again, they immediately said, because evidently Judge Barrett used the word handmaid in kind of like how men and women relate to one another. There's mutual submission. The Bible says a man has a submission to his wife and his family. A wife has her unique submission to her husband. But when we talk about those kind of things, they caricature them. They make fun of them. Then they create these dystopic futures where the Christians, oh my gosh, they're the ones who are going to steal our freedom. We just had 100-some years of secular domination last century, and hundreds of millions of people were killed because of their ideology. It's actually happening in China today, and the NBA, one of the biggest beefs I've got with the NBA and all their politicization of the NBA, is they're working with a government right now that is putting people in concentration camps just to make their Nike shoes. No big deal. Crazy. The dystopic future, it's going to be a secular dystopic future that takes over the themes of the church and actually does it in an antichrist way. You know, so again, you know, Christians, you got to understand that's what they're saying about us, and we've got to quit being defensive about it and go on the offensive and say, no, the Christian worldview has granted so many blessings. We can defend that. There's a great book, just came to my mind, D. James Kennedy back in the day said, "What if Jesus were never born?" It's a great book. You should read it. What if Jesus were never born? The world would be a lot different place today. And the Western world, you know, it got onto that. I think the Western world's jettisoning its Christian roots. I get that. I think to a lot of people's chagrin, and it's going to be to a lot of misery too, I believe, in the long run. But this notion that the secular progressive view is to actually stifle the Christian view, to kind of make sure because it's going to get in the way of our secular progress. Oh, no, it's actually going to prevent our regress, if you will, or our regression. Now, it's interesting, the Roman Catholic, she's a Roman Catholic mother of 7, and of course, you know, she thinks Roe v. Wade was bad law. And she's not going to just, if she overturns it, it's going to be because there's constitutional precedent to do that, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But even before we get to whether or not she's going to overturn Roe v. Wade, I'm just getting tired of this whole thing. It's like Roe v. Wade. You know, when I watch the History Channel and I watch something about Hitler, I'm always seeing Auschwitz, and I see the bodies of people stacked up, and I see all that. And I think you should see it because, you know, look what the government could do to people. And by the way, he started with Germans and he ended with the Jews. But the point was, look what he could do. Once he determined that certain people were not human, look what he could do to them. Why can't you see the garbage bags of baby parts that come out of an abortion clinic every day? I was told it's not a child. I was told it's a fetus. I was told, don't look here. Well, then let me look. I mean, I've seen operations on appendixes on television where there's blood and the people's bodies are open. I've actually watched those on public television, but I can't see the byproducts of a simple procedure called abortion. Why not? And, you know, I just get to the point I'm saying, look at what it is before you start to tell me whether we should do it or not, because it's a big challenge to our humanity right now, and we're treating it euphemistically. And, wow. And so she's being grilled over this. Now, my point is, when I look at that procedure and I look at what it actually is, and I say, if you look at it too, and you look at what it really is, and you can say, well, it's no big deal, whoa. But we're not even asking her to vote based on that. We're asking her to determine whether the law is constitutional. That's all we're asking from her. The legislature is the one that's supposed to legislate how we behave with one another. So again, she's a brilliant woman. She was first in her class. She should be someone that feminists and conservative women alike celebrate. And yet what you saw was a caricature already of people that came to protest her this week. Okay? So her view is what we call textualist. She's a textualist, originalist. That's what she is, which means that what she's saying is that if it's not in the Constitution, then that is unconstitutional, or if the Constitution speaks against it, then that law's got to be rewritten, if you will, to be constitutionally aligned. And if you want to change the Constitution, which you can, we actually had an amendment where we said you can't drink in America. So prohibition was a constitutional amendment. Well, there's a process by which you've got to go through changing the Constitution. And you're not just supposed to say, well, my opinion as a judge says something new. No, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So, again, she even said she's not on the court even as a conservative. She's on the court as a textual originalist. So, the question then is, why is she being attacked? Well, there's an underlying attack that if you're a Christian, you can't be fair to everybody. That's the new thing. And we've got to come to grips with this because it's not going away. Our kids are being attacked in university classrooms. They're being attacked. We're being attacked in public forums. If a person has a Christian moral worldview, they're being attacked and being told that that worldview is no longer welcome in the public square. Bernie Sanders actually said, if you're a Christian who believes that Jesus is the only way of salvation, how can you be a public servant? He's a public servant. He said, you can't represent everybody alike. He's wrong, but again, we got to be more than defensive of that. So there's this underlying notion that if she's a committed Christian, whoa, she's really someone we should be very worried about. So again, when we look at these things, she's basically saying, no, I'm here to, I'm not in the business of legislating from the bench. I'm here to actually be a judge of the law as it is and a judge of the constitutional limitations of government. Now, John Yoo, writing for Fox News, he said, if she's attacked, and this is before her confirmation, she said, if she's attacked for her faith, then, especially because she's devoted, here's what she should say. Now let me just kind of read what he said. She might respond this way: I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either represents or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any ecclesial source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will directly or indirectly upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials, and where religious liberty is so indivisible that an act against one church is an act against all of them. Again, I agree with that. I still think it's defensive. It should say more, because it kind of gives the impression that Christians are the only ones imposing or capable of imposing their viewpoints on people. The reality is secularists are imposing their moral viewpoint, and all people are imposing their moral viewpoint, because that's what legislation is. We're just saying do it properly. And then there are legislative limitations to what the government can be involved in. That's all we're saying. Right now, John MacArthur's church, there should be secular people that are defending his right to have public worship out in church, in that church in California. The fact that only he and his congregation are fighting for their lives, that's an offense to the First Amendment. That's an offense to fair-minded people. There should be even people who are not religious in general who should be standing there saying, you can't do this. The NAACP, not the NAACP, but the First Amendment organization, it just popped out of my head. They should be defending the church out there. They should be defending the church. It's right to be the church in the community, even if they don't necessarily agree with what they teach in that church. And again, we're not seeing that. And we should be able to defend the rights of other religious groups, that they should have the same religious liberty that we have. So again, that's a good statement. And then he talked about how she could bring to bear President John F. Kennedy's words. He said, I'm not the Catholic nominee for the Supreme Court. I'm this administration's nominee for the Supreme Court who happens to be Catholic. John F. Kennedy said that when he said, I'm the Democrat nominee for the president who happens to be Catholic. Now, that's what people were saying she should say. Again, she was attacked for being a traditional person, for having a big family. She's been attacked as a person who, again, because she's a committed Christian, how can she be fair? And so some of the questioning of her is, will she recuse herself and all these particular things, and she's being asked to say, is Roe v. Wade a super precedent, and she's even been asked, what's George Floyd's impact, what's the impact of his death on you? And these are strange questions, because she has a right to have her opinion on those things, but they're saying if you don't have our opinion on those things, then you're not legitimate to be a Supreme Court justice. Well, now we're politicizing the court. And by the way, and we'll talk about this, I think, next time, or maybe the time after. We're going to get into this critical race theory stuff. The biggest beef I have with the notion Black Lives Matter is that the very people who espouse that phraseology don't care about black lives, and they're not going to liberate black lives. They're not going to liberate minorities. They're just regurgitating the same policies that actually subjugated the black family and minority communities to the government. They're doing the exact same thing. They're doubling down. They're destroying the family even more. They're making people more dependent on government. They're giving them less ability to be free on their own and to live their lives freely. And they're doing it with impunity, and they're blaming you for their bad policies. Those policies, called the war on poverty, did this to our cultures. And they're doubling down on those things. So my argument has always been, I'm against it because it doesn't actually liberate black lives. There's another way of talking about it, but you're not allowed to talk about it. So again, they're insinuating that if she has a Christian worldview on this, she's really not going to be someone who can legislate fairly. We should turn that around and say, no, Senator, I think your policies are the ones that have destroyed black America. You should be ashamed of yourself for those things, but evidently you're not. And you're doubling down on them, and you're somehow saying that I'm the problem because I don't agree with your policies. Again, I listened to some of these questions, and I thought, wow, like even the Second Amendment question she got, do you own a gun? The Second Amendment, if I understand it correctly, means you don't have the right to ask me that question. Because whether I have one or not, the first defense that I have against government intrusion in my life and criminality is that you don't know whether I have a gun in my house or not. And the minute you make me define that or decide that, then you know my capacity to push back against you. The Second Amendment was actually to protect your right to be a citizen who can push back against these things, who has the freedom to do that. So to ask her, all right, do you have a gun? I don't think they have the right to ask that question. And then if she did, I don't see why that is somehow a nefarious thing when the Second Amendment is literally written for free citizens to take care of themselves. I think of Condoleezza Rice when she talks about her father sitting on the front porch with his shotgun as the KKK and the rogue police went by, and they just looked in and thought, well, we're not going to go into that house because he can defend himself. So attacks on her faith, attacks on her family, wow. She actually responded, and I'd like to read some of her response right now. I thought she did an excellent job. Again, my only concern is that we're still defensive in nature, and we're actually giving credence to the underlying charge that somehow the Christian worldview is more dangerous. I think we got to flip that around, okay? So she said this was last year she talked about at Hillsdale College. She said, when it was asked what role should faith of a nominee have in the confirmation process, she said none. Okay? Then she said, so whether someone is Catholic, Jewish, evangelical, or Muslim, or has no faith at all, it's irrelevant to the job. Now, I know what she's saying there because she clarified that in a little bit, but already at the first, you hear kind of that the people of faith are still the really ones we got to be nervous about. You're not nervous about secular people at all, but you got to be nervous about those people of faith. And I said, so is having faith, or this is my concern even right at that point, or being a person who believes that believers are a threat to liberty, is putting such a person on the court, is having no faith, or putting a person on the court who believes that believers are a threat to liberty. Is that good? Because that's what they're kind of saying is the right person. A person who has no faith, maybe has no even moral convictions. What? So again, they're challenging her. They're saying whether you, but then she says, I do have one thing to add. This is where I thought what she said was great. She said, I do have one thing to add though. I think when you step back and you think about the debate about whether someone's religion has any bearing on their fitness for office, it seems to me that the premise of the question is that people of faith would have a uniquely difficult time, she did a great job here, separating out their moral commitments from their obligation to apply the law. I think people of faith should reject that premise. I think people of faith can differentiate that premise and do a better job of executing the law and separating out the fundamental things of faith and the fundamental issues in culture. And then she said, all people, of course, we hope most people, have deeply held moral convictions, whether they come from faith or not. So people who have no faith, people who are not religious, who have deeply held moral convictions, it's just as important for them to spend time thinking about being a judge, to set aside their moral convictions, personal preferences, and follow the law. What she's saying there is it's not her role to legislate. And to that degree, she's very correct. And she said this is difficult for everybody, especially if you have deep-seated moral convictions. I thought it was a great answer. She said, so a person should be willing to set aside personal preference, be they moral, political, or whatever. They should be concerned about whether a nominee can set those aside in favor of following the law. And then she said it's not just a challenge for religious people. It's a challenge for everyone. I think that what's not being asked, we're saying, can a secularist who believes that Christians and committed believers are not really worthy citizens, or they're citizens not with just differing views but are enemies of progress, can that person be a fair judge? And I've read to you some very pronounced secular progressives who literally think the church, in its view of things, is an enemy of the progress of our country. Can a person who believes that this notion of being created in the image of God, which gives you inalienable rights, they don't believe in any of that, can they be a fair-minded constitutional judge? Can a person who thinks that they can circumvent the legislative process, they can circumvent the voting rights of the people, they can circumvent all that just by voting their conscience as a Supreme Court justice, do we think they should be on the court? Those are the people that scare me half to death, because they can impose a very different view of America overnight and feel very proud of it. I was talking about the fact that this happened in California. In California, they voted for the Traditional Marriage Act, Defense of Traditional Marriage. 75% of those who voted for traditional marriage were African American and Hispanic. 75%. It was the liberal white people who voted against it, and they lost. And then the liberal white people started to break the law, started to marry people in defiance of the law, and that's not Governor Newsom. He was actually marrying people when he was the mayor of San Francisco, defied the law, and then it went to the Ninth Circuit Court, and they disenfranchised black and Hispanic Americans unlike any time since Jim Crow. And you didn't hear a word about it. To us, that's the threat. Now, whatever your view of marriage is, to actually say you can't have a different view of marriage. You all have to believe the exact same thing the secular progressives say about these things. And that's what we object to. We object to using government to make decisions where they're not really supposed to be involved. So, can an unbeliever in God maintain the constitutional limitations of a government that believes that our inalienable rights are founded in our relationship to God? Can a secularist who believe that Christians and believers are not just citizens, but that they actually are a threat to the culture that we in, can they actually do these things well? So Christians, we've got to actually start to go on the offensive here and say, with our two-kingdom view of these things, we can be a much better voice in the culture that can honor voices that we disagree with, because we know God is at work in the world to also preserve it, even through non-believers who are doing excellently in their vocations. And we can honor that. We can even undergird that and support that, even if we differ on some of the ways that people execute the office of their vocation. We can speak boldly about God's preserving work, even through people who have different faith perspectives than we do. I signed on to a paper where lots of people signed on saying we will not use the words heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. We'll use the terms male, female, and we'll talk about healthy male to male, healthy female to female, healthy male to female relationships. And a lot of people signed that document, not just Christians. were several imams signed it. The Jewish organizations that we work with signed it. Even a lot of secular organizations signed it. So that was a great example of how in the left-hand kingdom, in God's preserving kingdom, we can speak a certain way that blesses all of us. So I think we should learn how to turn this thing around. I think basically what's going on today is that the secular partisans have demonized those who are principled, committed Christians, not vice versa. It's ironic that we're the live and let live people, because we're not really, that's not our ethos really, but that's what we've become in our culture. We're fighting for the freedom for people to be able to live their lives according to their conscience. And our conscience is captive to the Word of God. Now, Lorraine asked the question, and so I'm going to finish with this question. She asked the question, she said, in light of Romans 13, even if a person, she's elected to the Supreme Court, and let's say she disagrees with abortion, but in light of Romans 13, how does a Supreme Court judge in good conscience perform as an adjudicator in cases of abortion? Well, that's a great question. And first of all, again, she's functioning as a judge in that vocation. And so to that degree, she has to actually say, what's my role as a judge? But for now, the question with Roe, and that's the reason why it's a tough question. The question with Roe is did the Supreme Court overstep its boundaries? That's the main question. The ruling will not be am I for Roe or am I against Roe? It would be whether Roe was a good constitutional law. And even those who are pro Roe v. Wade know that it was done in a nefarious, they created a right that is not in the Constitution. And so in that sense, it is an illegitimate law. Just like Dred Scott was an illegitimate law. It was the view of a handful of people against the prevailing view of many people in the country. And they used their position as judges to enforce something on the country that the legislators would not do. And so the justices may have strong issues about an issue, but the question is whether the ruling overstepped the constitutional limitations of the Supreme Court. And Dred Scott did that, and that's why Dred Scott was rightfully reversed. So Dred Scott was overturned by the justices themselves. Now, if the country was racist to the core, then every legislature would have voted that in. Obviously, that didn't happen, and the Civil War happened. We're hoping that over Roe v. Wade there isn't a civil war, but what we're saying is it should not be decided by 9 people. Well, actually by 5 people. It should be decided by either the legislators or free people in dialogue with one another. So Roe is a ruling like that. And so it invented things not in the Constitution, and if she's a constitutionalist, she might, if a case comes before her that deals with that issue, she probably will rule in favor of the constitutionality of something, not whether something was actually wedged into the Constitution. And that might happen. And Roe might be returned back to where it belongs, to the legislators, and the legislators will then make decisions about that. And I think there's going to be a lot of agree to disagree stuff on this, because there's moral reasons why you really should be against this. And there's going to be limitations even to that viewpoint in our country, okay? So in this case, people are worried about, is overturning it, is that really good? Well, if something was unconstitutionally constituted, then to bring it back to the constitutional process of the amendment process. If you want to make abortion a constitutional issue, you got to go through the amendment process. They didn't do that. Then it's got to go back to the legislators. But you cannot invent a constitutional protection and then, because you wedged it in with 5 people, then say now it's constitutional for everybody. There could be an overturning of that. But understand what would happen. It would be overturning it to the sense that now it becomes a debate again. And it goes back to legislators, and that's where it should have been decided in the first place. So I hope that helps. There is a way we can amend the Constitution that was violated in Roe, just like it was violated in Dred Scott. And I think that is a threat to our liberties, not returning it back to the legislators. But again, she's still going to operate within the law until something comes up that really gets back to the heart of that particular question. Okay? I hope that helps. this is where we're at today. I'd like you to start taking your Christian worldview and making it something where you start to say, this has been a positive thing. It's a positive thing for our country. It's a positive thing even for those who disagree with us. And it undergirds holding these liberties not in check, but these in trust. These liberties in trust for the sake of all people. And our worldview undergirds that. So it's a great thing. So let's learn how to speak that for the sake of others. So speak the truth in love with humility and grace. Be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Until next time, God richly bless you.